markets, and I'm excited to have Dr. E. Michael Jones here to discuss his book, Barren Metal. And we're going to talk about usury. We're going to talk about capitalism and the impact that usury has on a declining population in the historical aspects of what happened in Europe, and especially what is happening in the United States today with our declining population. Hey, welcome you, Michael Jones. I really appreciate it coming on the show.
Thank you, Professor. Good to be here.
Um, yeah, the first thing, I had Brian McCall on and Dr. King on, and I loved discussing this stuff, and we kind of jumped right to usury. But in your book, you really talk about capitalism. I kind of want to talk about a brief kind of history of capitalism with you. And if you had to, and I love how you did it in the book, if you had to define capitalism, how would you do it?
Okay, capitalism is state-sponsored usury. So we bring the two things right together right there. It is also the systematic appropriation of all surplus labor. But let's just begin with systematic. Capitalism is state-sponsored usury. Now, let me just set the stage here a little bit. We have just witnessed one of the greatest transfers of wealth in human history. And I'm talking about what happened in the United States, beginning with the Reagan-Thatcher era to this day, where through usury is the vehicle of the transfer of wealth, transfer from the middle class to the upper class. No one seems to want to talk about this. I have a reason. I think there's a reason why nobody watched it happening, because this transfer of wealth, let's take it back a few years. Let's take it to 1973. Wages stopped going up and abortion was legalized. So you got the two issues right there, wages and population. And over the next 50 years, that dynamic basically became the vehicle of that huge transfer of wealth out of the hands of the middle class and into the hands of the elite, where it stands right now. The reason people didn't understand it was because everyone was, including myself, was preoccupied with sexual liberation, the decline of sexual morality, the use of sexual morality as a form of political control to distract everyone from the real issues facing people, which were economic. That's exactly what happened to the Democratic Party over this period of time. They switched from advocacy of the working man or unions into advocacy of sexual politics. And that continued all the way up to the Biden administration. And the thing that the event that symbolized that the end of that and the return of the repressed, I think, was the election of Zoran Mamdani as mayor of New York City. He's the man who basically broke with that trajectory of sexual liberation as a form of control, distracting people from their economic issues, and returned to the working class as the main basis of his coalition in New York City. And that's what got him elected. So I think that's what happened over this period of time. You have all kinds of people talking about all kinds of things, and they can't identify the problem because they don't have the proper categories.
So, when you talk about economics, you have the factors of production, you have land, labor, entrepreneurship, and capital. So your main thing is it has to do with capital and labor. And I know how you mentioned how it's when capital has the preeminence over labor, correct, that you get that usurious system that we have today. If government doesn't have restrictions on the dominance of capital, you can get what we have today.
Yeah, I think that economics took a wrong turn when Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital, because it diverted everyone. He demonized capital. To demonize capital is like demonizing hammers, because some lady down the street got beaten to death with a hammer. That's not the issue. The issue is usury. Capitalism is state-sponsored usury. Capital is neutral. It can be good or bad depending on how you use it. But usury is always wrong. It always leads to the concentration of wealth. And that's the issue that has to be addressed, not capital. That's a distraction.
Okay, let's define. How would you define usury? And I know there's many definitions, and a lot of people call it just excess interest. How would you define it as a historical aspect of the Catholic Church?
The key document is Vix Purvena. Benedict XIV, Pope Benedict XIV brought this out 1745, and he said that any interest is usurious. Any interest. So all interest is usurious.
So it has to be interest, and we have to separate it, right? We have to say it's to make a profit on something, not to cover costs, right?
Okay. Now this it can. So let me continue with Vix Purvena. Pope Benedict said usury is always wrong and it will always be sinful, but I don't have the expertise to deal with financial instruments anymore. The Pope cannot pronounce on every single financial instrument and tell you whether it's usurious or not. So you're going to have to take that to the private forum, talk to your confessor about your particular instance, and he'll tell you whether it's usurious. If we go back to the church's first attempt to deal with usury, it's basically in Florence, in Italy, the Italian city-states, in the 15th century, when the whole economy was shifting from a labor economy to a money economy. So the serf in the Middle Ages owed to the landowner days of labor. You didn't need money. All you need is to work in the field, and that's that. At this point, the money economy started because of manufacturing. Cloth manufacturing is the beginning of the money economy in Europe. At this point, the state wanted money. The state is not going to take, this is a republic, okay? If you're talking about Florence, it's a republic. They don't own the land. They're a republic. And so the state wants taxes and money, and the peasant doesn't have any money. Nope, the worker doesn't have any money. Where does he go to the money? He goes to the Jew. The Jews were the only people who could lend money, who were allowed to lend money, and he had to pay 43 1/3% interest, which is ruinous. Usurious by any definition of the term. Okay. And that led to, and he had to, it was a pawn shop. So basically he had to pawn his tools, which meant he couldn't work. So how are you going to pay this back if you can't work? So as the church intervenes in this crisis, the Franciscans and the Dominicans set up what they called Monte di Pietà, or pawn shops for the poor, where they would charge 5% interest. And the Franciscans got behind it, and it was starting off, and then it got complicated by all sorts of quibbling over, well, what do you mean by interest? Is a fee interest? Is it compound interest? Is it simple interest? Back and forth. Is that 5% usurious? I think it was stupid to get involved in this thing, but that's what happened. The result was, the other aspect of this was that you had to expel the Jews if you wanted to have a Monte di Pietà, because it's very simple. Because as I said, the Jew was charging 43 1/3% interest. That meant you could give your money to the Jew, and he would pay you 20% if you had money, if you had capital. And cardinals in the church were going to the Jews by night, secretly, giving them their money and making 20% interest, which meant that you couldn't compete. The Monte di Pietà could not compete at this point. So at that point, I cover this basically historical development in Barren Meadow in my book. It was a good attempt, but half-hearted. And the main problem here was the fact that the prince always needed money. He always needed money. He was always short of cash. You had the landed aristocracy. They're always short of cash. If you want to wage war, you need money immediately. And so you have to borrow. And so you have to keep the Jew in town. And this was part of the problem that led to all sorts of other problems. For example, like England expels, 109 countries expelled Jews in England in 1290. What the deal that the Jew made with the prince is, okay, I'll lend you money at whatever, 5%, but you have to let me charge 43 1/3% for everyone else. The prince allows that, and suddenly there's social unrest. The prince has got to make a decision. If I keep going this way, there's going to be a revolution. They're going to overthrow the government, and so I'll expel the Jews. It never came to any type of what should I say, coherent, systemic solution to the problem.
Interesting. So, still on the topic of usury, and this is what I always tell people. I love the Fifth Lateran Council definition of usury because it's very difficult. How do we apply it to our daily lives? Like, for example, Bitcoin. And the Fifth Lateran Council said, "For that is the real meaning of usury, when from its use a thing which produces nothing is applied to the acquire of gain and profit without any work, any expense, or risk."
Absolutely. Yeah, that nails it. Okay. And
Yeah.
it Shakespeare nailed it in Merchant of Venice when Shylock wants to offer lend money to Antonio. And Antonio says, if it's breed of barren metal, keep it. That's what it was. Aristotle said that money was sterile. Money can't produce anything. Only human labor can produce things. But the illusion of usury is what Shylock said in the play, where he said, my ducats can copulate faster than Laban's ewes and rams. This is a direct contradiction of Aristotle, who said money is sterile. And that's precisely the conflict, the illusion that money can act. Marx would call it a fetish, attributing power to a thing that cannot act.
So let me ask this question then, because a lot of people, younger people, love crypto. Would you say, and I kind of think it's the intention of the person, if you want to purchase something as Bitcoin because you believe you're going to make a profit and you don't want to put it into a productive asset, can that be considered usury?
No, I wouldn't call it usury. I call it a waste of productive asset. Because I would say that the Bitcoin is a tulip bulb. Anything can acquire value if you bid up the price, and you create a bubble. And they did that with the Dutch did that with tulip bulbs. And the price goes up and up and up and up. And if you're clever, you'll bail out before the bubble bursts. But that's what I don't see Bitcoin as anything other than a tulip bulb. Why would it be anything other than that? It has no value as currency. I think that what happened basically after people started accumulating Bitcoin is that they could use it as collateral. But then you're borrowing money, you're getting in debt using this as collateral, which is, we're back to the old problem of labor and usury.
Okay. Can you give a brief history of modern capitalism, how it went to the feudal system into I know you wrote about it, and I read other books about it too, how it was kind of a brutal time to get those people who were living on sustenance and they're happy about it, and to try to do the transition to work for an actual company or a corporation and get them off the land.
The history of capitalism is bound up with the history of Protestantism. There's no question about it. Historically, the first bank was the Wisselbank in Holland in 1609. It's also bound up with the migration of the Jews. So basically, in 1492, the king and queen of Spain expelled Jews from Spain, and half of them went to Turkey, and the other half went to Holland, where they started became involved with lending money. That's the beginning of the reserve currency. In other words, paper money as well. You put the money. This started with the time of the Crusades. where the Crusaders needed money in the Holy Land, but they didn't want to take their gold with them, so they put it in a bank, and they had pieces of paper then would say that you had this much money. It was used as credit. Okay, that's the way the bank started in Holland. But what you had in England was the looting of church property, the theft of church property. That's all the Reformation was in England. There was no theological justification whatsoever. Theological justification came after the fact to justify the theft. So now you've got a lot of people who came into a lot of land, but land is not money. And so they invariably have to borrow money. They put up the land as collateral, and they get basically set up the dynamic where they lose all the land. This was the story of England over this period of time, all the way up to the 20th century. It really took off after the Napoleonic Wars, after the Battle of Waterloo, when Meyer Amschel Rothschild had one of his sons, Nathan, in London, who started lending money to aristocrats so that they could build big country houses. And over the period of time, they never got out of debt. And so the culmination of that would be the Churchill family. Randolph Churchill died £70,000 in debt to Natty Rothschild. And the Rothschild forgave the loan to Winston, and then Winston became a pawn of Jewish interest in British foreign policy. The crucial turning point, so it's always been involved with Protestantism. The crucial turning point came with the what is now called the Glorious Revolution, which was basically the exclusion of the legitimate Stuart dynasty from the throne of England, and the bringing in William of Orange. Why did they do that? Because Catholic sovereigns could not be depended upon to enforce usurious contracts. So you could never do. The fundamental problem here with lending to princes is they have an army and you don't, if you're the usurer. And so this is what happened to the Medici in Florence. They became the bankers. They started lending money out, and they couldn't force them to pay back the loan. So now in England, you bring in William of Orange. The deal is we're going to create the Bank of England. We have money. We'll lend you the money to finance your wars with France, but you have to certify that you will accept the legitimacy of usurious contracts. And that was great, great idea. Okay, everything's doing fine. Beginning with the Bank of England, I think it's 1694, and everything's fine except for the fact that you now have a floating loan, a compound interest, and all floating loans become unrepayable within 70 years. That's exactly let's say 1763. At this point, Lord Townsend, who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, goes to Adam Smith and said, we can't pay this back. What are we going to do? And Smith says, make the colonies pay it. And that led to the American Revolution. So what you see here is the same cycle of debt becoming unrepayable on floating loans, leading to problems throughout human history. It's just an inexorable fact that all floating loans become unrepayable simply because of compound interest, the exponential curve of compound interest.
Yes, I always talk about it. That compound interest is huge, especially when you get past a certain years of the loan. Like you said, it's unrepayable. And which I will ask you later on with your opinions about a 50-year mortgage, which I'm going to do a video on. Now, let's get to the main topic. So what's the relationship between the rise of usury, outsourcing, jobs, and then population decline, the historical? So how does usury create that you've seen historically, and then what we see in the United States and most of the Western world today?
Okay. What is the vehicle here is wages. Okay, what you see in Florence, what you saw in Florence was the stagnation of wages, because the prince is concentrating on usury. He's making money. He's going to exploit the worker. The fundamental bottom line of every economy has to be the family wage. If the worker cannot afford to have children, that's the end of the workforce. Okay, the worker cannot afford to have children if wages do not keep up with productivity. Okay, productivity it becomes impossible to maintain without a workforce because labor is the source of all value. Okay, so to talk specifically about the United States, as I said, 1973, wages stopped going up, and at the same time, you have abortion. What you're doing here is you're transferring the wealth over this phase from being a productive economy, a manufacturing economy, which actually produces value, to a rent economy, which is basically where you're buying up the wealth that is accumulated through usury will now be used to buy up all assets, reducing the ownership of the working class, turning them into renters, not not allowing the wages to increase, and then asking them to limit the size of their family rather than raising wages. That's how it worked. That's how it worked in both. Well, it's certainly in the United States.
So would you say it's usury is the part of it. How much of a connection do you think that the monetary system, or is it 100% connected because our monetary system is usurious?
Right. Money is debt.
Money's debt.
So when money's debt, obviously the whole system is bound up with usury. And so you have the fiat currency. There are a lot of people who again, it's fetishism. You demonize capital or you demonize paper money when that's not the real issue. The real issue is usury. Now, with usury, it's easier to inflate when you have a paper currency, it's easier to deflate than a metal currency. But you can still deflate, you can still inflate a metal currency. Rome did it. The ancient Romans did it. By the end, there was just hardly any silver in the denarius? Hardly any silver at all, and it's not buying anything. So you have to focus on what is causing the problem, and what's causing the problem is usury. So you should not. It gets in at that crucial turning point. Now, what's the horse and what's the cart here? Is it first because people break with the sexual moral law and don't want to have children? They want to have the pleasure of sex without having the burden, the responsibilities of having children. Is that first? Or do wages go down to the point where people feel that they can't have children? And so they stop having it there. There's a mysterious kind of cause and effect problem here. But we know in 1947, the British government commissioned a group of people to look into why the British weren't having children anymore. Now, the Lambeth Conference had taken place about 20 years before that. So you have, which allowed contraception. You had that for 20 years. You had, at the same time, after World War II, you have this tremendous burden on the economy from the money, the debt that was incurred to fight the war. And it hits at the same time. And Tolkien makes this part of Lord of the Rings, where Pippin is looking out over Minas Tirith, which is actually Vienna. But he's saying, this was a bustling place. Now the houses are empty and no one's having children.
So yeah, I mean, here's my perspective too on that is that, like you said, which one comes first? What does debt produce? Debt produces immediacy without the work, right? I want the big house before I earned it. I want the nice car before I saved it. Therefore, you think of immediate, you think of today, you think of materialism. If we were a society of savers, so if I want to have that nice car, I'm going to work for 10 years and save. You think about long term, you think about eternal things, right? Families are hard, children are hard, and you think of this is good, an eternal thing, rather than, I think debt produces immediacy. I think it's a spiritual aspect with that, and I think you're right about it causes people to have the mindset, if I'm in debt, I have student loans, I have a mortgage, I can't have children today.
Right.
So therefore, you push it off.
I think that you're right, because the commission said that it has to do with the future, and the future is basically religious. You have to, because no one knows the future. You have to have a certain, in order to believe in the future. Let's put it this way: in order to have children, you're making an investment in the future. If you don't believe that there's going to be a future, then why would you invest in having children? That's part of the dynamic that is going on here. Which comes first? Which is the chicken and which is the egg? I think that what you saw over this period of time in England was the rise of atheism. Atheism, let's say, the golden age of atheism was basically the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, where you have basically a pact between England and Germany to drive God out of life. So the pact is basically Nietzsche and Darwin, denigrating the whole unique nature of man as a rational creature. If there is no transcendent aspect to man, then he will indulge in passion. He will indulge his passions, because why should he not? And one of the passions he will indulge will be this sex. And one of the problems he doesn't want to have is procreation. So he'll indulge in sterile sex. And suddenly you will have this decline in the birth rate, because you lost the transcendent aspect of life. I think that's the bottom line here. I think we're talking about the disappearance of transcendence in England. So why should I sacrifice for my children? Because I'm not going to get rewarded in heaven, because there is no heaven. So I'm going to take it here. And so I'm saying that the moment, the artifact that signals the beginning, the rise of the usurious economy is Faust. Das Faustbuch, which is the beginning of this, came out in Germany right around the time, around the time of the Reformation, which is also the beginning of the money economy. And this is also fueling the anger in the German lower aristocracy. People like Ulrich von Hutten, who was a contemporary of Luther. The aristocracy is being supplanted by the rich merchants, the Fugger family. That was the conflict in Germany at that time. And the question was this fetishistic understanding of money, borrowing. The Faust pact with the devil is like borrowing money. You sign on the dotted line, you get immediate gratification. You get to have sex with Helen of Troy, which is the main thing on Faust's mind at that point. And everything's going great. And then you wake up with, oh, wait a minute, I got to pay this back. I didn't know I had to pay this back. And then the devil shows up and he's got a contract. And this contract is classic pagan idea. Pacta sunt servanda. You signed the contract, whether it's usurious or not, you're going to have to pay the price. And then the moment comes, there are various versions of Faust and the operatic Faust. And at some point, love conquers all and the contract bursts into flame. I saw one of those performances. But for the most part, he goes to hell. And this is certainly in Marlowe's rendition of Faust. This Dr. Faustus, he's dragged screaming into hell. Oh, Christ, oh, Christ. And he's dragged into hell because of that usurious contract, because he sold his soul to the devil. And in this sense, Marlowe is the real voice of English conscience at this point. And that's why they murdered him. That's why the Walsingham murdered him, stabbed him through the eye. And in this sense, he's the opposite of Shakespeare, who is a Catholic who was willing to go along to get along. And his correspondence to that would be Prospero in the Tempest, where Prospero is like, okay, I'm not going to be a magician anymore. I'm not going to be like Faust. I'm just going to close my book. See you later. No, you don't get out of a pact with the devil that easily. And that's what Marlowe's trying to say. And I think it has to do with this increasing usury burden where there's no barriers anymore. The
Mhm.
aristocracy can do whatever they want. They have no responsibility to the people anymore. There's no such thing as a serf. We're moving to the time when you're an employee, like the Irish, and you have no responsibility to no Catholic responsibility to take care of the people who are under you.
Yeah, I mean, I think a more simple aspect of looking at it, if you had to pay a child, let's say $30 to do yard work around the house, and you paid him up front to do it, and then you ask later on, you're going to have to do the work, they're going to be like, oh, it's so burdensome. But if you make them do the work first, they are excited to do it because they know they're going to get paid afterwards. It's like the reward that happens after the work. And that's the same with usury. If I buy things today without the work, without saving, I'm excited today, but then it's a burden later on.
Right. Well, look,
And
I saw the actual foundational correspondence that created the student loan. It was a guy by the name of Silber who was at Boston University. And he said, this is like 1970. He said, look, if you graduate, you'll probably get a job worth making $10,000 a year. Tuition is like $1,000 a year now. We'll lend you the money at 2%. What could go wrong? Well, what went wrong was basically the price went through the roof because they had the money up front, which is what you're saying about the problem with both sides of the equation, both the problem with the creditor and the problem with the debtor.
yeah. So, let's go into some questions here, as in individuals, let's say good Catholics who want to make a difference. Like I always promote, let's be a nation of savers. But the problem about saving, as you know, our monetary system devalues the dollar over time naturally to the monetary system, that you do not benefit. If you wait to save to buy that house, that car, the price of that house and that car is going to appreciate over time. And you said, man, I could have bought it years ago if I just took out debt. So what things do you think individuals can do, and we'll talk about public policy in a second, that we can do to defeat the system? And I understand there's no debt. Let's try to minimize that. But what other things would you say?
Well, there are two issues. Okay. Do you have enough money to invest? I'm not talking about frivolous credit card purchases of something you don't need. Do you have money to invest? Do you want a return on your investment? Don't put it in the bank. It's always behind the times. Invest, take risk, invest in stock where you shared risk. If you have shared risk, then that's, what should I say? Shared risk is the criterion for return on your investment. If you share the risk, you deserve a return. If you don't share the risk, you don't deserve a return. So I'm encouraging people to invest in stocks. I know it's a rigged game lots of times, but I mean, what you need is to invest in labor. So I'll give you an instance of my own life. I got fired as a professor. I didn't know anything about anything. I started a magazine, and I was fortunate enough to have a wealthy man who gave me $40,000. I have lived off of that $40,000 for over 40 years now because I applied it to my labor. I needed that to support myself, but that allowed me to create something with my labor. I'm saying this is the paradigm that you have to have in mind. Invest in your own labor. Now, this is easier said than done. I mean, most people simply are not entrepreneurs. Most people are wage employees. And that means that you have to intervene and make sure that you have a just wage, which is a family wage. Now, we had this. We had this in the United States after World War II when Hank the Deuce, Henry Ford II, signed an agreement with the UAW. That became the norm. The family wage became the norm for American industry, and that's what has been destroyed at this point. And the main thing that destroyed it was feminism and the slogan, equal pay for equal work. Nobody understood how to object to equal pay for equal work. No, that's wrong. A man should get enough money to support his family. Now, that goes against everything that we have accepted here because of feminism. Okay, but that is the fundamental bedrock of any economy, and I'm saying it was put into practice here in the United States, and it was destroyed by social engineering, feminism, and all the other stuff that happened over this period of time.
So with your comment there, you said invest in your labor, which I love how you said that. Would you, for those who are motivated to do that, would you recommend them pulling money out of stock and invest in local into their labor if they have the means and they're able to do that?
Well, you're investing in labor if you have stock. If you have a better, this is a question of, do you have a better opportunity? Do you suddenly realize that there's a gap in the economy, in the market that you can fill if you buy this particular machine or you do that? Well, then sure, take it out. Go for it. This is gospel. This is the gospel. Remember what the gospel said, where the guy gives out talents to people, gives out talents to 4 guys, and so gave 5 talents to this guy. The master returns and he says, I want my money back. And he said, well, I invested it and here's 10. And then the last one says, I buried it. And he attacks him for doing that. I could have put my money in the bank. That's not an endorsement of banking. It's just saying that's the worst, in a sense. It's a sure, stupid way to invest your money. But I could have done that. You didn't even do that. You buried your talent. So if you don't take risk, you don't deserve a return. Now, that's different than the wage. The wage is something different. But I'm saying if you've got money to invest, you have to invest it in labor, because labor is the source of all value. Anything else is going to cause problems, usually something to do with usury or risk, like bubbles. Like the stock, you can get into the stock market, you can get involved in a bubble, and that's not a good idea either. But I mean, I'm trying to talk about broad principles here.
So I'm kind of go back to what we talked about earlier of Bitcoin. When you buy Bitcoin, like you said, it's like almost like tulip mania. But you're not investing in labor when you do that. You're expecting a return without any gain. Would you go into? I mean, I don't know if I would call it sinful, but how would you say that for those who want to put their money into something and it has nothing to do with labor or someone's work?
That's called speculation, isn't it?
Speculation, yeah.
So economics is not a recipe for how you can make money on the stock market or by investing these things. Economics is principles that you need to apply. So, like gold would be the classic example. Okay, why do people invest in gold? What's the problem with gold? Gold is not productive. It's not labor. The classic example from literature is Midas. Okay, he's got the golden touch. Okay, he touches something, he turns to gold. This is great. I am the wealthiest person in the world. And then he tries to eat a meal. Up, that turned to gold. And now what do I do now? I can't eat because everything I touch turned to gold. And then he touches his daughter turns to gold. This is the whole point of the warning about gold. Why are people investing in gold right now? Because of inflation. It's always a function of inflation. The price of gold does not go up. The value of your currency goes down. And gold is a terrible means of exchange. It should never be money. Went to Iran. There was a contest. The lady who I was in the contest, the lady won it. And the reward was 5 gold coins, actual gold coins. And she said, would you like to see them? And I said, yeah. And she said, put them in my hand. My hand immediately closed. And I couldn't open my hand. I could not open my hand. I wanted that gold so much. And this is the problem with gold. It's not a good medium of exchange. Why would you ever put that in a vending machine to get a Coke or something like that? You will never do that. Okay. Yeah. It absorbs money and makes the money unproductive because it makes it unavailable to labor. That's why
Yep.
it's bad. Even if you can make money on the rise, speculating, cash out after a year, and okay, I understand that, but that's not the productive use of labor. And I'm saying the example in my life is I earned a lot more money from my labor with a $40,000 investment than I ever could have earned if I had put that $40,000 in gold or anything else. You name it.
Well said. Yeah. So, with gold, let's go into just real quick with monetary systems. If you could do the E. Michael Jones monetary system, how would that be? Before you answer that, like I said, the problem with gold, and I always tell my students this: if I'm trading my labor for your labor, and that's what money is, a good medium exchange, we can transact. But when you introduce something like you said, it was so beautiful, like gold is a beautiful thing, you're putting something involved that makes it more difficult for us to trade. So gold can have that impact because what does gold do? Gold makes you hoard. You want to hoard gold.
Absolutely,
And
it's in
and what
Tolkien.
does the
And
and what does the dollar?
you become a dragon. That's both
Yeah,
in
and what
Wagner and
yeah.
Tolkien. Smaug is sitting on a pile of gold. You have to turn yourself into a monster to protect your gold.
And
Go ahead.
the US dollar does the opposite, right? Because it goes down in value, it causes you to go into debt. So the dollar makes you go into debt because you want to buy today before the prices go up tomorrow. And then gold does the opposite. You need a money in exchange. You need something that is, and I always joke around about this, that's not beautiful, it's ugly, that you don't think about because I want what you did. I want the labor that you're offering, and I'm willing to trade my human energy, what I did with you. So, E. Michael Jones, so if you were going to pick a monetary system, I have my favorite one, my opinion. How would you, and I think that's where, if we want to change America, it has to change with the Federal Reserve. It has to. With the fractional reserve system, commercial banks create money through debt. That's how you do it. So in good economic times, you have more liquidity because banks are lending out constantly. Bad economic times, they're hoarding it because they're worried about people losing their jobs, and it makes you have the booms and busts. What would be how do you think it should look?
Value labor, eliminate usury. Okay, let me. I hope this doesn't sound. People get the wrong idea, but I gave a lecture in German to a group that was founded by the CIA in case the Russians came through the Fulda Gap, and so one of the people in that lecture series was Hjalmar Schacht, who was one of the greatest geniuses up there with John Law in terms of finance ministers in Europe. And Hjalmar Schacht resurrected the German economy in the 1930s. He did it in the 20s. He created that hyperinflation to basically pay off debts, and then he ratcheted it back. He needed gold to do that because there was a gold standard, and that's the way people worked. Gold standard is a terrible idea for money. There is no amount of gold in the world that can equal human productivity. There is no amount of gold in the world that can keep up with compound interest. Okay? The Fuggers are an example of that. They lent to the Habsburgs beginning in 1494 when the Habsburgs came into possession of every single gold mine in the New World. And in 1555, they went bankrupt. How do you go bankrupt when you own every gold mine in the New World? The answer is compound interest because the curve kicked up at that point and they couldn't pay off the loan. So you have to have a country. What is money? It's not gold. John Law proved that. The only problem with John Law is with every politician, they always print too much money. Every politician is like Mugabe in Zimbabwe. Oh, I got a printing press so I can print the amount of money that, let's say, the United States print. No, you can't do that. The money can only equal the labor of that particular country, the value of labor in that particular country.
So are you familiar with the Chicago plan that was promoted by Fisher, the Fisher equation, and a lot of economists back in the 20s recommended it, and then World War II, it kind of stopped.
No, tell me about it.
So Chicago plan, because what you're saying, if you don't have a gold standard, you have to have a fiat system. right? And according to our Constitution, Congress should be they should take care of it, which they passed it to the Federal Reserve. So now you can't say, "Hey, Congress, we had inflation because of you." No, we didn't do it. The Fed did. And what the Chicago plan would be, it's a fiat system that's based on production, which means it's 100% equity. It's not created through debt. Congress creates it, and it should grow at the rate of production. So they're going to estimate the
Absolutely.
last 5 years.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what should happen. It's no coincidence that it came from Chicago, because the Midwest was always the center of manufacturing and labor as value. And that was always the antithesis of New York, which is always finance and usury.
And if people want to know, there's someone from the IMF and the Bank of England named Michael Kumhoff. He promotes it. He did a paper in 2012. Ever get a chance to look it up? He does a bunch of videos on it, that our America would be so much better if we did this system. And he just showed that when you pull up a dollar, it's really debt. It has to be paid back. And the Chicago plan, which would be 100% equity into the country, it doesn't get destroyed if you pay it back, and it doesn't get created if you have debt.
Right.
So we're both in agreement with the problem about gold. If we're producing productivity at a 5% rate this year, gold cannot keep up, like you said.
No.
And if gold can't keep up, what are you going to do? You're going to hoard it, because it's going to be more value.
You end up with deflation.
Yep.
Gold guarantees deflation, and deflation destroys labor. So let's go Austria school. Murray Rothbard, his book on money says, "My ducats swell during deflation." Well, great. If you got the ducats, this is Shylockian economics. And the net result of that was basically during the Civil War, when people were being paid by the greenback, which was a fiat currency, a farmer could get $2 for a bushel of wheat. They go on the gold standard, and 30 years later, he's getting 50 cents for a bushel of wheat, because the gold has contracted the economy. It's like, okay, you got a fire hose. Your fire hose, the water coming out of your fire hose is human productivity. And now you got a keyhole here that all of that water has to get through in order to reach the people. And that keyhole is known as the gold standard. So it immediately cripples the distribution of money. It cripples labor, because the people aren't earning enough. That's the consistent deficit. Same thing. You could track the same period I'm talking about, 73 to the present, in terms of productivity. Productivity has increased enormously, and wages have not gone up to meet productivity. Well, they should, because if they don't, you're going to have this concentration of wealth that's going to destroy the economy.
Yeah, I mean, and for people that, for more simple terms to think about it this way, is that, again, in a debt-based system, when you know prices are going to rise, you want to buy today, and only way to buy today, I need to go in debt. But if you think prices are going to fall, what are you going to do? You're going to wait. You're going to hoard your money, and you're going to buy later on, and you're going to always wait. And the way that money should be is, when you need something, you should buy it. And that's a virtuous thing for a society. I'm going to do a couple more things and see what your opinion on this is. The 401k, I can't think of the guy's name. He created it in 1977 or 79. He regretted it because it kind of destroyed the immediate family, where grandparents said, when it moved down to Florida, I don't want to be a burden, and used to be together. I want to promote that people should be able to use their company match pre-tax money onto local investments outside of those 20 investments that a company says, BlackRock, Vanguard, you must invest in.
Right.
And I think that's a simple solution where they can ease the tax code, and they could say, you know what, Drew Blazsik, you can go use that money and buy that property, and maybe use your family for labor, right? I could use my kids and teach them something, instead of saying, I'm going to put away, not look at it, and I'm going to die on my deathbed with $1 million and never even see it.
All right, so you got a number of issues here. The one is a pension. Are pensions a good thing or a bad thing? I think pensions are a good thing, especially when At the time when let's say Social Security was created, you had huge numbers of people in the actual muscle type of workforce where you can't do it after a while. Your body simply will not allow you. If you're a coal miner, you need a pension because you need money after the fact to live the life when you have to retire early. So that's not a bad thing. The question is, how do you invest the money the money that accrues? How do you invest it? And that's always going to be a temptation. Like the Teamsters Union pension, it's always going to be a temptation for criminals to loot, or it's always going to be how are you investing it, and so on and so forth. I think you have to separate the two things.
And what's your opinion about Trump's 50-year mortgage?
Preposterous, bad idea, totally a pawn of the usurers in New York City. Everything he does is in the interest of the usurers of New York City. So bad. 30-year mortgage is bad. 20-year mortgage is bad. The longer the mortgage, the more money you have to waste on usury.
And people, if you look at the math behind it, the argument is payments. You can buy a nice house today, lower payments, but when it goes from 15 to 30, yeah, payments drop. But when it goes to 30 to 50, it doesn't drop much at all because of compound interest. And if you do the math, I have a whole model. I'll do a video on it. If you go from 50 to 100, I think it drops like $30, your payments. So when you get to that point, mathematically, the argument doesn't even work because your payments do not drop.
What is the solution? The solution is wages, not more credit. The solution is put the money, give the money, send the money to the people who are actually producing the wealth, because labor is the source of all value. That's been the chronic problem of the United States of America. It's always been by the rich and for the rich.
We're getting up to that hour. I got some rapid questions I want to ask you and see what your thoughts are. In our country, we tax labor at a greater rate than we tax capital. Is that a mistake?
Yes. What we should have is a wealth tax. Wealth tax, not income tax, wealth tax. And we have a duty, a moral duty to expropriate the money of the usurers. The man who articulated this was Thomas Aquinas. When the Duchess of Brabant wrote to him about Jewish usurers there, he said, you have a duty to take that money from the usurers and give it to the victims. But if you can't find the victims of usury, which is difficult, then distribute it to the poor. So we have a moral duty to expropriate money from the usurers, and that a wealth tax would do that.
Interesting. And all right, how about we talked about housing prices get out of whack. I got a couple ideas about housing. Would you eliminate the 30-year mortgage? And in my opinion, if you want to see houses prices drop, if it's a 15, people would have to work, save, and put a big down payment. But what's your opinions on that?
I think we should resurrect the ethnic neighborhood. I think the ethnic neighborhood was a check on housing prices. You could not speculate. There were certain people, if you were in a Czech neighborhood like Cicero outside of Chicago and a German moved in, the Czechs would riot and throw rocks through your houses, windows, and drive you out. That limits the people who can buy in that neighborhood. It keeps the prices down. And then you should have a local credit union. Once the prices come down, have a local credit union that can help support the people that you trust and want to live with to help you buy a house.
So ethnic neighborhoods, you're saying, would limit the amount of people that would live in there, and you wouldn't speculate.
Would eliminate demand, lower the demand, and when you lower the demand, the price goes down.
Should the government get involved and restrict foreign investment, China and other countries who buy up property?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The government is responsible for the destruction of ethnic neighborhoods after World War II. I wrote a book called The Slaughter of Cities. I go into this whole story of social engineering in detail and how they broke down what was basically a really good idea. I grew up with it when I lived in Philadelphia. I watched it being destroyed. I'm a refugee from an Irish neighborhood in Philadelphia because of Black migration orchestrated by the Ford Foundation.
Now, what about if you have a guy like from Wonderful Life, like Potter, who wants to buy up a bunch of property? Should the government restrict of how much house houses you can own.
All right. How many should land be a saleable commodity? Okay, I cover this in Barren Metal. In the Holy Roman Empire, in the Germanic principalities, you could own land, but you could not sell it.
You can
I
own
think
it.
that's you can own it, but you can't sell it.
So
okay,
just real quick,
let me update you now. I get calls every single day, multiple times during the day, asking me to sell my house by some Indian who's working for BlackRock, because there's an unlimited amount of money and there's a limited amount of space on this earth. And these people have so much money, they're buying up everything and they want to turn everyone into a renter, and the breaking down the traditional system of home ownership, which is one of the great things about America.
But what you just said, I never thought of it that way. You can own property, you cannot sell it, which means there's no purpose of speculation. But the only way you can make money on land if you make it productive, right?
Right.
So if you own it, I need to make it productive and have a way. No, that's smart, I think. I guess one more question would be, I always heard that in Ireland during the potato famine, Ireland was still a net exporter of food during that time, which means should the government in our countries have restrictions on how much global trade we have, where it should be, like, if it's a natural resource, it should be used for the people of that land.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely, yeah, they were exporting food at that point, because every single inch of Irish land was earned by an absent landlord like Palmerston in England, and he assigned overseers to grind the poor. And then when it wasn't, this is debt driven. Palmerston is going into debt. He's borrowing money to maintain his lavish lifestyle, and he's going to grind the worker in Ireland, the peasants in Ireland, to make his interest payments, his payments. That's the story of that. And at a certain point, he decided to get rid of them and ship them off to America.
Because of debt. That's interesting. Because of debt.
Yes, debt.
That's what it does.
Palmerston's estates were loaded down with debt. There's not an Englishman. Find an Englishman who was not in debt to the Rothschilds during the 19th century. Find him.
So for the individual person that because the one who's guilty is the usurer, but the one who, for example, doesn't save, doesn't properly do things, and always goes in debt, are they participating in the sin of usury? Let's say to get a car loan for 12%.
Yes.
Are they guilty of any kind of sin?
Yes. Now, this is going to be related to gambling. If you go and to your church and play bingo, my grandmother loved to play bingo. Okay, and she would win, put a penny or a nickel down. If you're gambling and it has no effect whatsoever on your ability to nourish your family, okay, it's a pastime. That's not what professional gambling is, and that's not what the economy is. So debt should be viewed in the same light. I have a credit card. That credit card is money. Okay, I pay that credit card off at the end of every month. I never go into debt. So what? But if you slip into debt, they're betting you will slip into debt, because you're going to wake up one day and say, I have to have that thing. If you slip into debt because you had to have something that is not necessary, you should go to confession.
So as a good Catholic, we should, for economics and finance, is prepare for, we know we have to get a car every so often, say 10 years, save, put some money aside. We know we might have that. We need to save. But we all know you could have a 4-year-old car and you could have a tragedy happen, and you might have to go in debt. And that would not be the sin.
I got married and I didn't. My father gave me a car and I gave it up because I couldn't afford to maintain this car, and I rode bicycle. We got around by bicycle. So don't go into debt. Don't go into debt. Don't go in. And the worst type of debt is car. Don't buy a car on credit. You got to depreciate. Or at least you buy a house on credit. You have an appreciating asset. You have a depreciating asset that you're paying off with future money. bad idea, completely bad idea. I would walk. I understand that the world that has been created for us makes public transportation at least inconvenient and possibly impossible, but I would do everything within my power to prevent that type of thing from happening. Do not go into debt.
That's great advice. And what's crazy, the numbers, I don't have it with me right here. Inflation, it's not because of inflation, but the average price of a car that people are buying, the new car, has skyrocketed to the 30s of thousands to over 50 something now.
Yes.
And it's not because of inflation. And if you look at it, it's because the banks are offering now 8 to 10-year car loans.
You remember what I said about $40,000? I have been living off of $40,000 for over 40 years now because I invested that in my labor. I could spend easily $40,000 on a car. That shows you the ridiculous situation this economy is in right now.
Well, Michael Jones, Dr. Michael Jones, I appreciate everything. Is there any last things you want to add or anything?
Yeah, we have to have the right categories. We have to identify the problem properly. And I think that's why I said the two options here are labor and usury. Baron Metal, A History of Capitalism, as the conflict between labor and usury. Invest in labor, avoid usury. And then once you have established what we need to have a social, basically, renewal here that will do whatever we have within our power to eliminate usury from the economy, and that will include a wealth tax on the usurers. We have a moral obligation to take that money and bring it back into the economy so that the people can benefit from it through things like high wages.
And I just want to encourage, if what you just said, invest in labor. And especially if you invest in your own labor, you bring your family together, you can include your kids, and it brings people closer together. You build something together if you're able to do it. And I think that's huge. I think that's so big to do something like that.
I agree.
But hey, I appreciate it. That was Dr. E. Michael Jones. This is Drew Blazsik, Logos and Markets. Thank you for listening, and leave a comment if you have any questions. Thank you so much.